All right, my homies, how we doing again? Hopefully life is treating you well. All right, so we're going to talk about the Supreme Court decision of Brown versus Board of Education in this video. In the previous chapter, chapter 2, we checked out how almost 500,000 African American troops fought for the United States of America during the First World War to try to demonstrate their love for the country. And how from that we have a man by the name of Charles Hamilton Houston, who fought in the war, who goes to the NAACP and becomes part of their legal counsel, and they start to slowly but surely chip away at the idea of separate but equal. And of course, the NAACP stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Now, in chapter 3, we see the NAACP challenge this dogma, this idea of separate but equal as established by the Plessy versus Ferguson case in 1896. So number 13 says, identify the issue that was brought before the Supreme Court of the United States in the landmark case Brown versus Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas. All right, so there was a young girl by the name of Linda Brown. Linda Brown was an African American, and she had to attend a school which was segregated, and it was like 21 blocks away from her house. However, there was an all-white school like 6 blocks away from her house that she could easily walk to, but she wasn't allowed to go there. Her father, Oliver Brown, claimed that by relegating her to the all-black school, it denied her her protection under the 14th Amendment of the United States of America. This 14th Amendment, of course, guys, comes into effect during the Reconstruction era, right? And it was not... he claimed she was not being given her legal protection under that amendment. So this case first, obviously, to get to the Supreme Court, has to run through the state courts in Kansas. He tries to sue the school board. It is not successful. He then takes it to the appellate court in Kansas, and it is not successful. And then it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States. And in number 14, the outcome of the Brown versus Board of Education case at the Supreme Court was that schools were to no longer be segregated. The decision of the Supreme Court, and it was a unanimous decision that was read out by Chief Justice Earl Warren by a decision of 9-0. Every single justice on the Supreme Court decided that segregation had no place in education. None, right? So yeah, at this point, guys, now schools were to be integrated, and in the Brown 2 case, which gave school boards an opportunity to discuss their fears about integration and potential hurdles to the integration order, the U.S. Supreme Court basically said all schools had to make a prompt and reasonable movement towards integration with all deliberate speed, whatever that means, right? So by 1957, we see the drama of integration play out, and we'll talk about that in number 16 and 17 with Little Rock High School. Now, before that, as soon as the decision of the Supreme Court is announced to the American public, we see a rallying cry that is headed by an American senator by the name of Strom Thurmond, and he announces something called the Southern Manifesto. The Southern Manifesto was a rallying cry for states' rights to ensure that segregation continues. And basically, guys, it was a response to Brown versus Board of Education. He basically said that, you know, he called on all Southerners to resist integration by any lawful means, right? And again, just wrap your brain around this, right? This is a representative of the American public, like an individual in the federal government who is basically denying the decision of the judicial branch of the federal government, right? I would think that doesn't reflect well upon him. And then, of course, we see the drama really play out in number 16 and 17. So Little Rock High School, September 1957, Little Rock High, with all deliberate speed, is going to allow 9 African American students who, of course, guys, I mean, they're children, right? They're not yet done high school. So they're going to let these 9 students into their school. And the governor of Arkansas, a man by the name of Earl Faubus, initially supported the integration order by the U.S. Supreme Court, although as the day of the opening of school in 1957, September, came closer, he then flipped it, right? He changed his support for integration to supporting segregation. And why would the governor of a state like Arkansas do this? Well, it's because he realized that most of his constituents, most of the people of Arkansas, were actually against integration, or at least the white people were. Not all of them, but most of them. And he realized that if he didn't support what his constituents were supporting, this would cost him political capital. This could mean that he would not be elected as governor again. So right at the last moment, he actually switched his position on integration, and he started supporting the segregationists who were protesting outside the school. Now, to ensure that the 9 students were not allowed in, we actually see Faubus using the National Guard, the Arkansas National Guard, to basically set up a perimeter around the school to make sure that the students can't enter into it. There's many sad images. If you go online and you Google Little Rock High School, Arkansas National Guard, you will see the troops standing there. And as the 9 black students were approaching the school, you had guardsmen standing, basically telling the kids to leave, like go somewhere else, right? That's what basically they were telling them. Now, President Eisenhower was watching this play out, and he decided that enough was enough. And this is the answer to number 17. How is President Eisenhower significant when it came to the Little Rock Central High School drama, right? The drama of integration. Eisenhower said that the orders of the ruling of the Supreme Court was not being adhered to. And as the executive branch of government, one of his jobs, one of his roles as the president, is to ensure that the rulings of the Supreme Court are being adhered to, and that was not happening. So his response was to federalize the Arkansas National Guard. No longer is the National Guard under the jurisdiction of Governor Faubus. Now it is under the jurisdiction of President Eisenhower. And with that, basically now he used the National Guard to get rid of the segregationist protesters and clear the crowd, and also to escort the students from home to school and in class all day and back home, to make sure that nothing bad would happen to the 9 students, right? The African American students who were coming to this school. Now, there's a lot of sad American history, and I feel like this is probably some of the saddest. All these children wanted was an education, and this just was seen as unacceptable in the eyes of many Southern students at that time, right? In the documentary, you saw students protesting, holding up signs like, "We won't go to school with Negroes," and stuff like that. And like, it just makes me shake my head. Again, I mean, it's skin color, it's melanin. That's all that it is when it comes to the color of somebody's skin. It's an environmental adaptation, right? Yet somehow these students thought that white students and black students were fundamentally different. I honestly think that the students protesting against the allowance of black students to get an education was actually because of their position of privilege and power was going to eventually fade away, right? This is, some white students holding on to that, that position that they had up here to try to keep the black students down there, right? And I mean, if these students are able to get an education, that could mean they could get the jobs that were solely relegated for white people, and that was a threat to many of them, which is unfortunate, but true. All right, so guys, that is chapter 3. And chapter 4, we're going to be introduced to the incredibly courageous lady by the name of Rosa Parks. You've probably heard of her, but if you haven't, then you will. Love you guys. Take it easy. Peace and be good.